Hello, my name is Mikolaj Sobocinski. Thank you for inviting me to present at GBL Virtual Conference for 2024. So far I used to work at a few universities in Poland. I traveled around Europe on exchange programs and study visits and conferences. At present, I live and work in Kuwait. I have around 20 years of experience in introducing games in education, around 15 years in gamification education, and nearly as much in adapting games for my courses. Today, I would like to share a few of my views on GBL and on adapting games for GBL. But before we can start discussing adapting anything for GBL, first we need to consider what we actually can adapt when we consider games. Because games do not exist. It's a concept which Wittgenstein described as undefinable, because games fluctuate and change and depend on ever-shifting vocal interactions, and the language, which is simply intangible. We could also follow Huizinga and state that the games are behaviors guided by arbitrary rules with specific win conditions. However, neither of those approaches helps much when you're a teacher trying to make your lessons fun without overthinking it. However, for the second time, just for the sake of it, let's say that we can clearly differentiate the following, although it's not a comprehensive list. So, commercial games, games for learning, educating games, serious games, simulations, models, and so on. Let's not forget playing, having fun. It's not a game. When you whistle for fun, draw for fun, play ball for fun, without rules, that's not playing rule-based, goal-oriented games, but we do use that in education as well. So it seems that as a classroom teacher, you have a variety of options to choose from when you wish to use games or adapt games for your lessons. On purpose, I included here educational games, which are made specifically for learning purposes. This means that they may be games per se, but sometimes they are not that fun to play. So are they really games or just interactive activities? I specifically wanted to have educating games here to stress that there is a whole group of commercial and play-for-free games which have extremely high educational value or align with learning outcomes. Let's say Sid Meier's Civilization series. And then, as I listed before, simulations, models, labs, seen as separate entities. However, this is a distorted view. Those games are interrelated or even overlapping. There are commercial games with RPG elements, or simply they are RPGs. There are commercial games like Harpoon, which I tried to play in the 1990s. It was so detailed, it was closer to serious games for naval students. These are not separate entities. These are fuzzy categories at best. However, if we look at games available today, at those thousands of tabletop, narrative, video, mobile phone games available at the market nowadays, they're all connected one way or another. Well, okay, maybe not all of them, but there are no clear-cut divisions anymore with all the games completely different and completely independent from the rest. Then there is gamification, which takes from games, but is neither games nor GBL. I mean, don't get me started on how often I need to make this distinction at conferences and workshops. So, what do we want to adapt? Games? Which games are we talking about? Well, when you see that there are so many different games and that their features overlap and classifications break down, it becomes extremely difficult for a teacher to start considering what it means to adapt a game for GBL or use a game in GBL. So the first question which the teacher really needs to ask before adapting a game is, what is my goal? What is this game supposed to do for me or for my students? These questions are more important as they will enable us to choose specific games or game elements for our needs. Without understanding the purpose of the course we teach, there is little point in discussing what and how to adapt. Again, this presentation is not going to detail various curricula, educational approaches, or philosophies, but let's focus on a few examples. Different age groups will require different content, even from the same skills like reading comprehension or critical analysis. Different subjects have different, distinct, or maybe overlapping collections of knowledge. Or maybe our game is supposed to influence and boost skills or kinds of intelligence. After all, games are used as icebreakers, team bonding sessions, when empathy is more important than any knowledge we might gain. Understanding the goal of the task we want to build around the adapted game is paramount. So, to cut a long story short, first it helps to understand the goal of the course we teach, or an individual lesson or task, and the needs of our students and their wants. They will want to play, but play what, when, how? It depends on your specific group of students and your specific course. Only then we can properly tackle the question adapt how. So how do we adapt games? From my experience, I can say that you need to be a player. You don't need to be a good player, a winning at all costs player, but you must be a player. It helps when you understand games with their components, mechanics, and dynamics, to follow Professor Werbach's division. When you see what rules and pieces are at play, you may notice that there are the same, or at least similar, rules and pieces which your students use in your classroom. That's the real vantage point you're looking for. When a few core game components mirror some of core knowledge or core skills in your course, bingo! That's what we're really looking for in games when we want to adapt them. It helps when the game follows your own likes. You will become invested. It helps when the game follows your students' likes. They will become immediately invested. That's the point, right? Suspense of disbelief. The willingness to dive into the rabbit hole so that playing the game feels natural and the learning happens nearly invisibly alongside. So how do you do that? Simplify the rules. Run the game with your students. Notice mistakes. Simplify the rules. Run the game with your students. Notice mistakes. Iterate and iterate until you get to only a few remaining elements which still make the game fun to play, and your goal-oriented elements become indispensable for the game. A few examples from my yard are World Peace Game, Once Upon a Time, Alice is Missing, and Dungeon Quest. So let's start with World Peace Game. This is an educational game, a game designed specifically for GBL by John Hunter. Please watch his TED Talk to find out more, it's really impressive. To make it simple, it's a game about world conflicts and interdependencies, and about the cost of war and the cost of peace. I believe this is one of the best GBL games I have ever heard about in my life. And also, it's one of the least accessible games which will be nearly never used at schools. The game takes around a day to play, to have all necessary warm-ups, analysis, closing sessions. The game will take 3 days. I mean, who can carve out 3 full days from their school calendar? This is what I'm talking about. Games, even the best games, need to be adapted to the course you're teaching and to your students. Most games, even education-oriented games, will probably not meet your needs and expectations right away. So from overabundance, let's look at something small that you can hold at the palm of your hand. Once upon a time. The game was developed in 1993 and it has survived on the market till today. It must be good. You play cards, tell stories, steal stories from others, and try to reach your own ending on your final card. It's fun. Without any changes, it can be used in the classroom. They even tell you how. However, in my opinion, the game has too many rules and takes too much time to play in the classroom. So as I said before, let's think about core elements and core rules. Randomly distributed cards. One card equals one sentence or story part. One person can speak at a time. The story can evolve towards any cards added to it. And it's supposed to have an ending. Well, that's a set of rules you can explain to your students in 5 points. Distribute a smaller batch of cards to each student, and it will simplify their choices. Allow support between players, and you turn competitive game into cooperative tasks. Divide your students into small teams, have them create different stories, even from the same cards. Let them compete in writing stories down, telling them, enacting them. I mean, whatever they do, they will practice, revise, and self-correct. It's one of the best games and one of the best adapted games for GBL I have tried. Another of my favorite games is Alice is Missing. I must admit that I adapted it and played it with teachers only. At least so far. I'm still waiting for the right moment to use it in the classroom. In Alice is Missing, you need 5 to 8 players or teams who uncover cards about events in a little town where they live. And in the process, they try to find out what happened to their friend, Alice. To spice it up, the whole game is played via chat room, so it's a completely silent game, even though it's a card game with players sitting in the same room. What are the elements? A few types of cards. Characters, motivations, secrets, NPCs, items, locations, and more or less this is it. It's a proper RPG verging on a LARP, so there are preparation instructions with lines and veils. There is a pre-setup process, the game itself, and reflection meeting. All of that can take 3 to 4 hours. So it's an amazing game which you will never use in the classroom. It's too long. Unless you can spot the key elements that align with your course. For me, it's communicating effectively and negotiating meanings in a foreign language. I stripped the game, left only the names of characters, without their motivations, without their secrets. I shifted the timing to go from 90 minutes to 30, and then I scaled it down the preparations to 7 steps required from students. So, create groups, choose the writer for the group, receive character cards, familiarize students with all the names of characters and places, but nothing else, just familiarize. Explain to students that they are in different locations so they can communicate via shared chat room only. Give the first student the message that will start the game. And finally, every 2-3 minutes, provide students one by one with a new clue which they then share in the chat room. The game evolves organically from the clues on cards and student speculations. It's an amazing experience. And from 4 hours of playtime in total and 40 pages manual, it can be scaled down to 2 pages and 30 minutes of meaningful and uninterrupted written exchanges. My approach to breaking down the rules and deleting those I don't need comes from the goals of my courses. With different courses, the adaptation would look completely different. It's the learning goals which shape adaptations. But the game remains a game. It's interesting, it's fun, rather than a boring and self-centered educational quasi-game. However, adapting a game can also mean replacing its elements completely. In order to play Dungeons Quest, you need the board, tiles, cards of various types, tokens, pawns, and whatnot. Nearly all of that can be replaced by drawings on the whiteboard. That's how far I modified this game. Just for fun, I retained monsters, fighting, and loot as a spinning wheel in a PowerPoint presentation. What students do during the adapted game is that they make their moves, mark them on the labyrinth map that they keep on drawing on the board, and they note down their actions in their own quest log. They also write down what other players do if they come into interaction or visibility range. After 20 to 30 minutes, the game is over, and each player, or teams of players, they have a plan for a short narrative about brave characters, fearsome monsters, and plot twists worthy of Terry Pratchett. Each story is different as players write down their own perspectives, their own wishes and goals. Again, players, students, think that they are just playing while they are really practicing outlines, vocabulary retrieval, sentence structure, finally story or paragraph writing. Again, for the fun of it, I kept the pawns from the original game, but I asked students to draw their own pieces, which later we stuck with magnets to the board. So, if I were to reach a conclusion of using games in education, or game-based learning, if you will, I would say, don't do it. Don't play games which are too long, too complex, and diverge too far from your learning outcomes. Adapt them, as you can retain all or most of the fun while managing playtime and game resources much better towards your specific educational goals. I know, it looked like I have just reached a conclusion, but no, sorry. Always wait for a but. Everything that's important comes after a but. If we want to discuss GBL seriously, we need to consider legal ramifications and authorship of games and their adaptations. After all, can you take the newest song by Taylor Swift, change it to your liking, and use it in lessons with a few hundreds of students, share it with dozens of teachers or hundreds of teachers online, and gain place in the Hall of Fame for wondrous teachers? I mean, which laws protect Taylor Swift? Which laws protect game designers? Which laws protect game publishers and distributors? Which laws protect the game itself with its components and rules? And finally, which laws relate to teachers, students, schools, local councils, libraries, or even ministries of education? As far as I can see it, we will not have GBL introduced professionally and globally in education so long as these questions are not answered, and answered adequately. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars invested over years and decades into some games. What right do teachers have to change them and adapt them for free? I mean, who is the author of the game? Teachers? But who is the author of adaptations which sometimes require skills, knowledge, devotion, and hundreds of hours of redesigning and playtesting? I don't have those answers, but I do see the need to discuss legal issues here at the conference focused on game-based learning or game-assisted learning. The problem is not trivial or simple. Personally, I buy all the games I play and adapt. However, GBL games are distributed in schools for hundreds and thousands of students. This is mass publication. National schools do not earn a penny on education and application of games. However, private schools do. Should they share their profits when GBL is introduced? Should game designers invest in schools which introduce GBL? They advertise and distribute games for free. I don't have answers to those questions, but I would love game developers to take part in this discussion and reach some conclusions. There are tons of game elements and demos available to play for free for fans. Are those elements and demos legally available to teachers and schools? Again, so far I can say I have not seen any decisive steps from game dev in the gaming conferences I have attended. So, after all those considerations, should we even adapt games for GBL? Should we use games in education at all? I say yes, we should use games. We should adapt games in education. But we teachers need to be trained in seeing differences between games. I mean, not just video and board games, but types of games, types of mechanics, and game elements. Many teachers undergo compulsory workshops on an annual basis. Others do it out of their own initiative. We need more courses tackling GBL practically. Teachers need to become active players who interact with gaming community and eventually become not only consumers of games, but creators to some extent. We need to follow rules and the law, but the law needs to follow the current state of affairs. Nearly all games are widely publicized, online, with multiple resources provided for fans. What about the teachers? Can we use those resources? What about sharing and cooperating with schools and ministries of education? If 11-bit studios could do it with This War of Mine, awesome game. Every studio can do it. So, from this perspective, I would say that we need to hope for a three eyes approach in GBL. One, we need teachers willing to apply GBL, and this really boils down to adapting commercial games. Two, teachers don't exist in vacuum, and the working week can't really stretch anymore. Teaching 15, 18, or 20 hours translates to 40 plus working hours every week, weekends included. Schools, administration, resources, whole teams belong to institutions, not to individual teachers. That's where further support is required. And finally, three, games industry needs to awaken to the fact that majority of students play their games in schools and courses, state, private, tutor, you name it. Without cooperation, the application of game-based learning and game-assisted learning suffers. Education stagnates, and game industry profits do not reflect the actual reach of the target, the client, the player, the student. So in the end, reaching the real closure of this presentation, here are more general 3 points to finish with. First, I believe that in game-based learning and game-assisted learning, we should consider legal issues and ask game designers and publishers to start cooperating with education industry. Look at Minecraft Education or This War of Mine, available for free in Polish schools. Second, I'm using the term game-based learning and game-assisted learning on purpose. I believe that vast majority of GBL is really JAL, where games are used as warm-ups, elicitation tools, practice, revision tools, but never as the main element of the syllabus. Introducing game-assisted learning is much easier than pretending game-based learning is the same at primary school and in the simulations used by the military, firefighters, state administration training sessions. Game-assisted learning with adapted games is the holy grail of GBL. And finally, three is what I started with in this presentation. GBL works best, in my opinion, when we adapt commercial games. They are fun to play. They have survived on the market and have gone through testing, prototyping, and iterating. They are already prepared in clear sets of components, mechanics, and dynamics. If you know what to look for, They can be dismantled and reassembled into the perfect game you need in your class. They want to be adapted. It takes practice, it takes trial and error, but it works and it's fun. Aren't games supposed to do that for us? So, adapt games for the benefit of your students. So there you have it, my views and examples on adapting games for GBL. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and managed to find some useful takeaways. If you have any questions, please write to me or check my blog at gamesforteachers.net/blog. Thank you a lot for your time and I hope to hear from you. Bye.